What if I told you that everything paralyzing you right now has a solution? That the fear gripping your chest isn't truly yours? It's not evidence of a broken mind, but simply proof that you've been programmed to doubt your own power? This isn't a book of pretty words or hollow promises. This is a systematic dismantling of the fear that's been sabotaging you, replacing it word by word with unshakable conviction. We're not healing slowly here. We're waking up instantly. If you're exhausted from living with the brakes on, brace yourself. After this, you'll never be the same again. And that's exactly what you need right now. Fear is the invisible master. If I told you that every decision you've made, everything you've celebrated, regretted, or simply avoided, has been dictated by a master you've never seen, would you believe me? If I asked why you didn't pursue what you wanted, why your soul screams while you stay silent, why you hide when the moment demands you step forward, what would you say? Because I've been there. And if you're reading this, you might be standing in that exact spot right now. The problem wasn't lack of opportunity. It wasn't lack of talent or cruel fate. The problem was fear. Elegant, silent fear disguised as common sense. Fear that sometimes wears the voice of your parents, your teachers, the childhood news broadcasts. And its greatest skill isn't leaving fingerprints, it's leaving consequences. Procrastination, self-doubt, dependency. Fear operates from within, pulling strings you never see. The first thing I learned wasn't how to defeat it. It was how to recognize it, because you can't defeat what you can't see, and fear doesn't present itself as a monster. It hides inside sentences like, not the right time, maybe later, I'm not ready yet, or what if I fail? But, as a wise teacher once told me, fear is a state of mind, and you can control your mind. Have you ever wondered how many times fear convinced you that you were making the decision when in reality you were just obeying? Because not everything you feel is true. Sometimes what you call being realistic is just fear wearing a tie. Sometimes what you call virtue is fear in disguise. And sometimes what you call faith in God is actually fear of trusting yourself. Fear doesn't just slow you down, it convinces you that continuing to suffer is safer than trying. The fear of being free is so cunning, it doesn't whisper that you'll fail. It tells you success isn't properly timed, and you believe it, just like I believed it for years. It told me having a secure job was better than betting on my dreams, that staying busy was better than leaping toward what I truly loved, that avoiding the spotlight was safer than risking brilliance. But one night, my worst night, I understood something crucial. If I continued obeying fear, my entire life would be its creation. And I wasn't born for that. That's when I decided to observe it, not fight it. Observe it, like a scientist studying a virus, the patterns of fear. I discovered that fear has habits. It appears when you're about to speak publicly, tell your truth, apologize, take a risk, or ask for help. That message arrives when your soul extends beyond known boundaries, and paradoxically, its presence means you're moving toward something valuable. So I started using it as a compass. If something scares me and expands me, that's a signal I need to do it. As one of my mentors said, dare to fail, because that means you're alive. The opposite of security isn't danger, it's surrender. How do you defeat fear? Not by eliminating it, by replacing it with burning desire, with faith in life, with clear vision. Fear cannot withstand the fire of your purpose. It cannot survive in the presence of unwavering will. Here's the brutal lesson. Desire plus fear equals action. Fear plus excuses equals paralysis. Desire must outweigh fear, not because fear disappears, but because you no longer let it control you. You Decide from desire, not from paralysis. I started writing even when my hands trembled, speaking even when I hesitated, facing my shame even when I wanted to cry. Every small action in the midst of fear, every brave movement weakened its grip, not because I destroyed it, but because I shifted the source of my authority from fear's voice to truth's voice. Brian Tracy used to say fear evaporates in action, and it's true. Fear doesn't die in the mind, it dies in movement. When you make the call, record the video, raise your hand, say no, wake up again, that's when you reclaim yourself. Fear survives in paralysis, in excuses, in delay. But the moment you move, you declare, "This is me now." You don't break it with violence, you break it with truth. Not by shouting, but with decisions, the hardest discovery. Fear was also protecting me. It wasn't the enemy. It was a part of me that didn't know how to live without suffering, that believed suffering was safer than progress. I had to sit with it, listen to it, hold it, and say, "Thank you for protecting me until now. But I don't need this protection anymore. I don't need safety now. I need freedom." And there I began freeing myself from my own prison. How do you know if fear still runs your life? Look at what you avoid, what you postpone, what you make excuses for, what you say one day to. That's where your invisible master lives, still dictating how you live. But here's the truth. What you're avoiding is likely what will set you free. Everything that makes you feel small is showing you the size of your suppressed truth. Every fear is a locked door. Every locked door is an unlived destiny. You don't need to be brave to open it. You just need to be more tired of imprisonment than of taking risks. I'm speaking to you this way because I don't have time to be gentle with what's destroying you. I know what it's like watching life pass by while waiting for the perfect moment. I know what it means to silence what burns in the dark. I know you're capable of more, but you still don't believe it. So I'm telling you, fear is the invisible master, but you can fire it. You don't need to erase it. Just stop obeying. Stop making it your God. Stop listening to it as if it were wise. Stop giving it a seat at your decision table. Ask yourself right now, when you don't decide, who are you obeying? Who's making your decisions, your courageous self or your fearful self? Which version of you signed that contract with mediocrity? The one who wants to live or the one who just wants to survive? Because every time you delay, which part of yourself are you staying loyal to? This isn't just about fear, it's about identity. It's about playing a version of yourself you no longer want to be. When you succeed, not all at once, but step by step, you'll experience something that seems surreal at first. Peace. Not peace from avoiding problems, but peace from no longer betraying yourself. And then fear won't be the master anymore. It'll be a signal, a guide, an echo of the past still living in your body, but no longer in your will. I'm not here to tell you not to be afraid. I'm here to tell you that you can live with it. Walk beside it without obeying it. Act despite it trembling. Refuse to give it the final word, because that's real courage. Action in the presence of fear, not the absence of fear. Action, movement, decision, power. If you've come this far, I want you to close your eyes for 1 second and remember all those times when you weren't the one choosing. How many times you kept your truth safely silent, not to judge you, but to help you decide once and for all. Will you keep feeding that invisible master, or will you set yourself free? Because if fear still runs your life, that life isn't yours, and you didn't come here to obey. You came to create, to transform, to lead your inner world. Don't wait for another life to do this. This is the valid one. This is your life. Fear's perfect. Camouflage. Doubt. At first I didn't recognize it. It came to me like a wise, cautious, almost protective voice. "It's not the right time," it whispered. "You need more preparation. What if it doesn't work?" At first I listened to it like a mentor. I thought it was my inner voice of reason. But over time, when I noticed that voice appeared every time I was about to make a brave decision, I understood its true identity. It was fear in disguise. It didn't scream, push, or insult. It whispered in my ear and stopped me. The name of this most effective camouflage is doubt. Doubt is fear's most elegant trap. It doesn't push you off the cliff. It convinces you to stay on the shore and watch. It makes you think you're thinking when you're actually paralyzed. It makes you think you're being strategic when you're actually being ruled. Doubt is fear's most intellectual disguise, and if you don't diagnose it in time, it steals your entire life. I wasn't afraid to move. I had doubts, so I didn't move. Admitting you have doubts is easier than admitting you're afraid. But what we call doubt is, deep down, a lack of belief in ourselves. Where does this lack of belief come from? From years of obeying others, from years of failing and punishing ourselves, from years of feeding a broken image of what we think we deserve. One day I wondered, am I doubting because there's real danger? Or am I doubting because I've been taught not to trust myself? The answer was obvious, and it burned. I doubt not because of reality, but because I was taught not to trust myself. Because when I was a child, I was corrected for thinking differently, mocked for trying, punished for dreaming out loud. And now, as an adult, I carry that internalized judgment. As one of my teachers said, "There's no worse enemy than the voice inside you repeating what you were once conditioned to believe." That voice's name is doubt, and if you don't face it, you'll live with it as if it were your conscience. But it's not conscience, it's just fear in costume. How do you unmask something that seems so logical? The key is in what you avoid. Doubt doesn't appear when you're standing still. It appears when you approach the edge of expansion. It appears right before the leap, right before the declaration, right before the new beginning. That's your signal. Doubt doesn't attack the impossible, it attacks the possible. You're afraid not of failing, but of what success would demand: responsibility, visibility, change. You can't remain who you were if you succeed. So I understood. My doubt wasn't fear of rejection. It was fear of the responsibility, visibility, and transformation that success would bring. Doubt was protecting me from my own greatness. I was staying in a zone where complaining was easy, but growth was hard. And I had to decide. Either I'd keep hesitating to feel safe, or I'd risk trusting something I didn't have yet. That's when faith emerged. Not blind faith, practical faith. Faith built through small decisions. As another life teacher said, act as if failure were impossible. And I did. Not because I knew it would work, but because I was tired of living under the reign of maybe. I started doing small things that challenged that voice. I wrote the email I was afraid to send. I recorded the video I never dared publish. I had the conversation I'd avoided for months. And guess what happened? I didn't die. I didn't break. I wasn't rejected the way I'd imagined. Most of the time, reality was softer than what my doubt reflected. There I understood something crucial. Doubt doesn't predict. It invents. And you believe it. Have you ever wondered why you doubt yourself more than you doubt others? Why you give others the benefit of the doubt but condemn yourself before you even start? Why you think you need more time, more credentials, more approval to do what you already know deep down you should do? Because someone taught you that you weren't enough. And doubt is just that judgment walking with you. You don't need to eliminate it completely. Just stop obeying it like it's law. When it appears, ask it, "Tell me, what's the worst that could happen if I act?" Then answer yourself, "What's the worst that could happen if I don't act?" Most of the time, the harm of doing nothing is far greater than the possible mistake of trying. Someone once said to me, "But what if I'm wrong?" I replied, "Then you correct it, learn from it, and keep going. But if you do nothing, you can't correct anything. You just repeat the same empty loop with different names." That's what doubt is, the elegant repetition of sameness. You can live 30 years in doubt thinking you're thinking, but when the mind doubts, it doesn't think, it spins, and then it turns into excuse. So you don't need more analysis. You need a decision. The antidote to doubt isn't certainty, it's commitment. You decide to act even if you don't know everything. You decide to move forward even if you can't see clearly yet. Because if you wait for everything to be clear, someone else will have already lived the life you doubted. Friends, I'm not special. I just got tired of obeying that voice and started writing my own rules. Rule 1. If my soul wants it, I try it. Rule 2. If I doubt but it's calling me, I explore it. Rule 3. If fear says no, I say yes at least once. This was my internal revolution, not against the world, but against internal paralysis. And you can do the same. You don't need another course or another sign. Just look in the mirror and tell yourself honestly, "I'm hesitating because I'm scared. I'm hesitating because I'm stepping beyond the known. I'm hesitating because this version of me doesn't want to be enslaved to the previous one anymore." And if that's your truth, then this moment can be the beginning of your transformation. Not later, not tomorrow, now. While you're reading this, breathing this, deciding this, stop believing the voice that's never taken you anywhere new. Because the most tragic thing isn't doubting. The most tragic thing is listening to doubt as if it were truth. It's not guidance, it's deception. Today I'm inviting you to do something different, not something huge, just something you've been postponing. Do it not from courage, but from loyalty to yourself, from respect for your soul, from honor. Because there's a version inside you that no longer wants to live from that. And yes, even with fear, I did it. That's who you become next. Someone who doesn't deny their doubts, but doesn't obey them either. Someone who's afraid, but doesn't quit. Someone who knows doubt isn't the problem, surrender is. And if you've come this far, let me tell you clearly, you're not alone anymore. Not because you're reading me, but because you finally listened to yourself. And that changes everything. Fear as an isolated mental habit. You were never born with fear. You arrived clean, naked, and brave, hungry to play, explore, try, fall, and rise, cry when hurt. Fear wasn't part of your nature. It was part of the world around you. It was handed to you like a heavy coat the day you started asking questions, the day you wanted to try something different. Someone looked at you with worry and shouted, "Be careful!" They yelled, "You can't do that!" Or simply made you feel like you were too much to try, too little to succeed. That's how you inherited it, like an emotional disease passed down through generations, like a mold embedded in your mind, not from malice, but from repetition. You learned to fear the way you learned to speak, through the force of examples, through the weight of warnings, through the eyes of those who didn't believe in you. And without realizing it, fear became part of your operating system. It's no accident you're afraid to speak your mind, to appear vulnerable, to fail, to step outside the mold. Everyone trained you for this, and the more you repeated it, the more natural it felt. That's how a habit forms, not because it's right, but because you've practiced it enough. Fear doesn't need a reason. It needs repetition. And you've practiced it so much that now you say, "This is just how I am." But it's not. It's just a script you inherited and never questioned. When I understood this, everything changed, because I stopped seeing fear as an immovable wall and started seeing it as a mental habit, an emotional pattern that could be learned, which meant it could also be unlearned. Then I wondered, what if I started training the exact opposite? What if instead of reacting with fear, I practiced responding with courage, with faith, with determination? And that's when my reprogramming began. I didn't start big. I started small. I changed the way I talked. I stopped saying I can't and started saying, I don't know yet, but I'm learning. I stopped using words that made me smaller. I stopped justifying myself. I started observing every automatic thought that helped me avoid something. When I said, "This isn't for me," I'd ask, "Where did I learn this? Who taught me I couldn't? Why do I keep obeying an idea that isn't even mine?" The mind repeats what it hears most, and most of the time, what it hears most is fear. So I decided my mind would start hearing something new, something that expands me, not shrinks me. It was a daily process, like any habit, but it worked. Have you ever heard your own thoughts out loud? Write them down. Read them as if they belong to someone else. Then ask yourself, would someone who trusts themselves say this? Or someone trained to obey fear? You'll be shocked, because the thoughts you think are yours aren't even yours. They're conditioning. As one of my mentors said, "You're not thinking, you're repeating." That sentence hurt my ego but freed my soul, because if what I'm thinking is garbage, then I can also learn to think differently. And I did. I replaced every fearful thought with a power affirmation. Not organically, strategically. Every time fear said, "You can't," I answered, "I'm learning how." Every time it said, "You'll fall," I answered, "And if I fall, I'll get up." Fear isn't removed with motivation. It's removed with repeated action, new habits, conscious choices. So every morning I'd ask myself, what would someone who doesn't live in fear do today? How would they walk? How would they speak? How would they move? At first, everything felt uncomfortable, but over time, it became natural. Because courage is also a habit that can be trained. Nobody teaches us this. They teach us to fear, but not to overcome it. They teach us to obey, but not to trust ourselves. They mold us to be accepted, not to be authentic. But you're not a child anymore. You don't need permission. You don't have to keep obeying a fear you didn't choose. Let me tell you something maybe nobody's ever told you. You can choose your thoughts, and you don't have to believe them right away. You just have to repeat them until your mind obeys your new reality, because the mind doesn't distinguish between truth and repetition. And if you can repeat fear, you can repeat faith. If you can repeat guilt, you can repeat power. If you can repeat limits, you can practice possibilities. You are not your thoughts, you're the one observing them. And from that awareness, you can resist, like someone who's been hunched over for years and starts stretching. At first it hurts, at first you feel like you can't, but the body remembers, the soul remembers, and the mind can remember its original state too, freedom. Someone once asked me, but what if this fear thing is just part of who I am? I didn't hesitate. No, it's part of who you learned to be, but it's not your essence. Your essence is power, decision, creation. Everything else is acquired mental habits, and like all habits, they can be transformed if you're willing to train, willing to sustain the process, willing to stop protecting your programming with excuses. Because that's fear's other habit, justifying itself. We justify mediocrity, paralysis, procrastination as if they were conscious decisions. They're not decisions. They're conditioned reflexes. And if you don't observe them, they'll devour you. Start by observing yourself. Listen to yourself. Question everything that smells like surrender. Then train. Speak differently. Decide differently. Surround yourself with people who speak the way you want to think. Fear thrives in environments where everyone lives the same way, but it weakens when you're exposed to those who already think differently. Change your habits, change your thoughts, change your relationships, because if you don't change, nothing outside changes. And you're ready, not because you don't feel fear, but because you know fear is painful and everything you learned can be unlearned. I'm telling you this today the way I told myself years ago, looking into my own eyes. Stop obeying the voice that wasn't born with you. Start listening to the voice that was always there, suppressed by inherited habits, but always present. That voice knows what you want, knows what you deserve, and most importantly, knows who you are when fear doesn't rule. Practice this today. Repeat it. The strongest habit you can build isn't working hard, it's thinking freely. Everything else follows naturally. The religion of fear and punishment. There was a time in my life when I thought being good meant suffering. I thought the more pain I carried, the closer I'd be to divine grace. I was taught to fear eternal punishment more than to honor my freedom. I was taught that God saw everything, not as a loving being, but as a judge with a blacklist. I grew up with the certainty that any joy was suspicious, that if things were going well, I'd have to pay for it with guilt. This was called faith, but it was fear. At first, I didn't understand. I knelt, I cried, I apologized for thoughts that hadn't even turned into actions. I kept vigil as if everything human were sin. I became an expert in self-punishment, in suppressing my desires, in judging my emotions. I thought this was spirituality, but it was emotional slavery camouflaged by religion. One day, after months of living in emotional silence, I realized fear had settled inside me, not just as a habit, but as a sacred belief system. It wasn't just an emotion, it was doctrine. It was carved into me like stone. If you do this, God will turn away. If you think this, you're not worthy. If you're wrong, prepare to pay. And I started questioning. Why would a loving God need me to feel guilty to obey? Why would a creator be pleased that his creation fears him? The answer came like a crack in a wall. It wasn't God demanding that fear from me. It was the human system that needed control. Because those who fear obey. Those who feel guilty submit. Those who believe they're unworthy don't claim their power. The religion of fear and punishment has trained entire generations to believe spirituality means suffering. It convinced them that if something goes wrong, you're paying for something. That if you're happy, you shouldn't celebrate too loudly because the test is coming. We carry this thought so deeply that even when everything's going well, we feel like something has to go wrong because we've been programmed not to trust life, not to trust God, not to trust ourselves. And that's when I understood the trap. Fear from the pulpit paralyzes more than fear from prison, because it's invisible, because it dresses as virtue, because it pretends to be love. But it's terror, and it doesn't create, it only limits. The most destructive part of this mindset, it doesn't just distance us from ourselves, it makes us executioners of others. We start pointing, judging. We classify everyone who dares to think differently, love differently, seek God another way as sinners. We believe defending an idea is more important than honoring compassion, and so we become temples of fear, not channels of love. Until one day the soul screams, "What am I doing? Who am I obeying? Why do I feel like being myself is a sin?" And that's when real spirituality begins, not the kind that forces you to live on your knees, but the kind that demands you live consciously, not based on fear of punishment, but based on connection with the divine living inside you. I had to unlearn. I had to break invisible agreements with ideas I respected as truth. I had to tell myself, God isn't interested in me suppressing myself. God's interested in me knowing myself. God isn't waiting for me to fail so he can punish me. God's waiting for me to trust that I'm already whole. And when I started living from that, everything changed. I stopped asking permission to exist. I stopped bargaining with guilt. I stopped hiding my gifts for fear of being too much. I started showing up as a living extension of the divine source. And I understood. If that source lives inside me, then I don't need to fear God. I need to express God. Ask yourself, how many decisions did you avoid out of fear of distancing yourself from God? How many times did you silence what you felt for fear of sinning? How many times did you doubt your desire because you believed you weren't pure enough? Who defined that for you? Who wrote that mental script you've been obeying for years without review? Because faith based on fear doesn't liberate, it enslaves. Spirituality based on guilt doesn't transform, it poisons. And if the God you believe in makes you feel smaller than the world, then you're not believing in God, you're believing in the rejection of your own inner punishment. Here's something vital. The system that taught you to fear can also teach you to love, but you have to take the wheel. You have to consciously choose which belief builds you and which one chains you. Because not all teachings are the same. Some are just old chains nobody dares to cut. You can love without guilt. You can shine without apologizing. You can make mistakes without fear of punishment. You can trust without fear of being deceived. You can connect with your divine part without feeling unworthy. Because what's sacred isn't in fear, it's in authenticity. It's in the courage to look at yourself with love and say, I'm learning, I'm alive, and that's enough. One of my mentors once told me, you can't love a God you were taught to fear, but you can reconnect with a God who teaches you to trust yourself. And that sentence shattered me, because if God is love, why do we build our relationship with Him on fear? Would you love someone who punishes you for thinking differently, who makes you feel less for being who you are? Then, why do we accept this in the name of spirituality? It's time to cross the bridge. Not to deny your faith, but to heal it, to make it genuine, to make it free, to make it a source of power, not guilt. Start by questioning what you feel in your mind. Talk to your soul. Ask, what do I need to heal? Is my faith a source of peace or fear? Is my spirituality an expression of expansion or mental imprisonment? Does love allow me to live with joy, or does it keep me in emotional debt? These questions aren't meant to destroy, they're meant to purify. Because sometimes the truest faith emerges when you dare to dismantle the faith you inherited from fear. And if you've come this far, it wasn't an accident. It was because a part inside you already knew punishment isn't necessary. Fear isn't a guide. The soul doesn't blossom in suppressed silence. It blooms in the clear voice of those no longer willing to live from fear disguised as love. You were created not to beg for salvation, but to enrich your divinity with every free action. The real temple is your awakened consciousness. The real altar is your action aligned with your truth. And the real faith is trusting that God doesn't demand your suffering. God demands your life, with everything, with joy, with purpose, with truth, without guilt, without chains, without fear. The fear of failure and the fear of success. I never understood it until I lived through both. Some people don't move because of their fear of failure. Others don't dare because of their fear of shining. Then I experienced both, And when I learned that what trapped me wasn't lack of talent, but two opposite fears feeding each other, I began to free myself. The first was obvious: fear of rejection, of trying and losing everything, of the world seeing I wasn't good enough, wasn't ready, wasn't as smart as I appeared. This fear told me, don't start, don't risk, don't make a fool of yourself. And most of the time I obeyed. But the second fear was quieter, more cunning. It was the fear of standing out, the fear that everything would go so well my life would stop being what I knew. That fear whispered, are you sure you can handle this? What if they envy you? What if they demand more? What if you lose your freedom? I was terrified of being invisible, but I was paralyzed by being seen. I was terrified of failure, but I was also scared of the cost of success. I once stood in front of the mirror and wondered, what would happen if I did what I truly wanted today? If I stopped hiding? If I acted like someone ready? And the answer wasn't relief, it was anxiety. Because doing that meant losing the excuses, stopping the justification of my mediocrity, taking on my power without more delay. But saying I'm not ready yet was easier than saying, yes, I can, and now I have to take responsibility for my greatness. That's the trap. We think we're only afraid of mistakes, but we're also scared of the possibility of success, of having to sustain it, of it transforming us so much we no longer recognize our lives. It's no accident that right when you're about to make the most important leap, your mind throws thoughts like, what if you do it right, but don't know how to handle it? What if people start talking about you? What if your friends don't fit with you anymore? What if you stop being who you've always been? These questions come from the fear of leaving behind the zone where your soul was asleep, because standing out hurts when you've been trained to conform. You learned that standing out was provocative, that being different was dangerous, that excellence was threatening to those who hadn't allowed themselves to shine yet. So, you learned to stay just below your real potential, not to disturb, not to be judged, not to lose your place among those you love. But that's also a form of slavery, betrayal of your purpose disguised as loyalty to your tribe, with the excuse, I'm tired of this. I got tired of pretending I didn't know what I wanted, tired of hiding my ideas for fear someone would steal or attack them, tired of shrinking in areas where I knew I could lead, tired of waiting for everyone to be comfortable with my growth before I kept growing. And I told myself, if I have to choose between disappointing the world and betraying myself, I choose rejection, because my soul didn't come to suffer, it came to expand. And that decision was the most liberating I've ever made, because I understood that standing out wasn't arrogance, it was obedience to my inner calling. And succeeding wasn't ego, it was the natural result of someone doing what they came to do with passion, discipline, and truth. But I also understood this. If you keep obeying both fears, you can't fully live. The fear of rejection makes you invisible. The fear of success makes you an imposter. The first shuts you down. The second sabotages you. And if you let them coexist, you become a bright prisoner with a broken key. So if you're stuck today, ask yourself, am I really afraid of failing, or am I afraid of winning? Am I scared of not being enough, or scared they'll leave me when I am? Am I afraid of falling, or of having to fly without a guide? The answer won't always be clear. Sometimes it hides behind the mask of an emotional routine, behind a fake need for constant approval. Here's a key. Fear of rejection heals with imperfect action. You do something, you fail, you correct, you move on. Fear of success heals with identity. Because if you don't know who you are when things go well, you won't know how to sustain what you achieve. So, convincing yourself you won't lose relationships isn't enough. You heal by winning, by learning to succeed without sabotaging yourself, by receiving without guilt, by standing out without feeling like you're betraying someone. And this can only start with a deep decision, choosing to be yourself without fearing the consequences. I remember the first time I started speaking my truth without softening it, without decorating it. The first reactions weren't pleasant. Some people distanced themselves. Many looked at me as if I'd betrayed something. But I felt free. I felt whole. Because there's no greater peace than knowing what you're doing is authentic. I didn't have to pretend I couldn't anymore. I could honor my light without placing it above anyone else's, but without hiding mine either. Because I learned something. Shining isn't a threat to those who are ready. It's only a threat to those who haven't allowed themselves yet. And if you're at that point, knowing you're avoiding that step because you're afraid of falling or flying too high, I'm telling you, do it anyway. Not from courage, but from honor. Not to prove anything to anyone, but to stop postponing the life you know belongs to you. Because if you don't, someone else will. And it won't be because you couldn't. It'll be because you didn't dare. And that, over time, hurts more than any fall. Because failure stings for a while. But surrender aches in the soul. Now look at me, as if we were face to face. What are you waiting for to admit you can do more? What are you waiting for to stop hiding what you are? Why do you insist on living in dim light when you know you were born to ignite fire in everything you touch? If that's the case, if you fail, so be it. But don't stay in the same place again out of fear of ruining an image. Images can be repaired. A soul that refuses to live can never be repaired. Because in the end, it's not about winning or losing. It's about living with the awareness that you stayed loyal to your truth, even if it trembled. And that's real success. Success no one can take from you. Not the world, not your fears, not your shadows. Only you can deny it, but only you can also claim it. Without permission, without guilt, without fear. The fear of being yourself. There's a type of fear almost nobody talks about because it's not as obvious as the fear of failure. It's not as celebrated as the fear of shining. It's quieter, more intimate, more profound. This is the fear of being yourself, the fear of showing yourself as you truly are, with your raw ideas, your broken emotions, your different beliefs, your way of loving, thinking, and seeing the world. Because even though everyone says they want authenticity, very few are prepared to sustain it. And when you dare to be yourself, you don't just risk criticism, you risk loss. The loss of the character you built for show, the loss of relationships that only knew your made-up version, the loss of the comfort of fitting in. And that price, though invisible, is heavy. I lived in that character for a long time, the one who knew what to say to not stand out, who laughed when required, who nodded in meetings, who said yes even though inside there was a fire that wasn't gentle. I confused myself with that character. I felt an almost childlike instinctive fear, as if I'd be punished for stopping being who everyone expected. I wondered, what if I show my real way of thinking? What if I stop pretending it doesn't hurt? What if I say I don't believe in certain rules? What if I dress, speak, and decide like someone who doesn't seek anyone's approval except their soul's? Will they still love me? Will they still accept me? Will they still be there? But then I realized those weren't the right questions. The real question was, can I live in peace knowing I'm betraying myself out of fear of not being accepted? Because the real prison isn't what the world imposes, it's the one you keep locked from the inside with fear's key. And the bars of that prison are made of other people's opinions, inherited rules, comfortable silences. One day, while reading about how fear becomes a habit, this idea struck me. The most powerful person is the one who dares to be themselves, even if it means standing alone. And that sentence pierced me, because I understood that every time I was afraid to be myself, I was giving away my freedom. And nobody should have that much power. Not your family, not your friends, not your partner, not your religion, not society. Because who you are is the most sacred thing you own. And if that's negotiated for acceptance, what you receive isn't love, it's disguised tolerance. And you didn't come to be tolerated. You came to be lived, fully, with your light and shadow, with your certainty and contradiction, with your faith and doubt, without apologizing for existing. The transformation. In the middle of this transformation, I discovered something. Being yourself isn't just an act of courage, it's an act of respect. Respect for your soul, for your story, for what screams at you in the nights when everyone's asleep. It's also an act of faith, because you stop believing you need to scheme to be loved, and you start trusting that being yourself, unfiltered, is enough. And when this truly moves, everything changes. Yes, you lose some things. But what comes after is worth every release. People who know you arrive, no explanations needed. Opportunities that resonate with your purpose arrive. Peace that's no longer dependent on approval arrives. And most importantly, freedom that no one can take from you arrives, because it's no longer outside, it's inside. But this doesn't happen overnight. It's brutal honesty work. It means looking at what you've hidden, asking when I stopped being myself, and at what age I decided playing a role was safer. Which part of me did I lock away so they'd love me? And most importantly, am I willing to take it back, even if it means starting over? Because here's another uncomfortable truth. When you decide to be yourself, you often have to repaint relationships, habits, vision from scratch. But that rebuilding is no longer from obligation. It's from choice, from soul. And that changes everything. I remember sitting across from someone I loved and saying, "This is me. This is what I think. This is what I know. It's not what you expected, but I can't keep playing a role." I was trembling inside, but something was also blooming. Because in that moment, I wasn't just talking to that person. I was talking to my story. I was signing a new contract with myself. From now on, I'll only build alliances from my truth, even if it hurts, even if I'm left alone, even if I have to start everything over. And that contract transformed me. It didn't make me invincible. It made me whole. Because now when someone asks what I think, I answer without strategizing. When someone tells me they disagree, I smile without feeling threatened. When someone walks away, I don't chase them anymore. Because I learned that not everyone deserves my real version. Only those who know how to receive without trying to survive. Only those who don't feel my freedom is a threat. And best of all, when you start being yourself without fear, you give others permission to do the same. You become a hero saying, living without a mask isn't just possible, it's urgent. Listen carefully. If you feel like you're hiding part of yourself today, don't wait for the world to approve. Don't wait for it to be safe. Don't wait for everyone to understand, because that moment may never come. And if you keep waiting, you'll live decades as someone you're not, loved by people who don't know you. Acceptance isn't worth it. Peace is. Belonging is. But authenticity is worth more than all of it. Life is waiting for you, but not your curated version. It's waiting for the raw, human, real you. If you need to cry, cry. If you need to say, "I don't believe this," say it. If you need to change paths, change. But don't keep denying who you are out of fear of not fitting in, because what makes you different is exactly what you came to offer. And nobody else can do this for you. Nobody else can be you. If you keep being someone else out of fear, even you won't know who you truly are. When fear sabotages your inner voice. The most painful thing about fear isn't failure. It's not loss. It's not mistakes. The most painful thing is self-betrayal. Ignoring that inner voice speaking to you while everything outside screams the opposite. That voice that doesn't impose itself, doesn't need logical explanation. It just feels. We all have it. Some call it intuition. Some call it soul, consciousness, divine guidance. But whatever it is, you know it's there. The problem isn't that you don't hear it. It's that fear learned to speak louder. Fear took your mind's microphone and started imitating its tone. It disguised itself as responsibility, as logic, and began mixing with your soul's screams. Until one day you couldn't tell which voice was yours and which was fear's, and you stopped trusting yourself. It happened to me, too. Many times I knew what to do. I knew. It was clear. It wasn't rational, but it was true. But then fear came and said, "What if you're not ready? What if you're fooling yourself? What if you ruin everything? Wait. Ask someone else first." And then I doubted, withdrew, stopped. Until one day, after years of inconsistent decisions, I wondered, why do I need so many signs to do what I already know I want to do? Why do I seek so much evidence when there's already certainty inside? And why does my mind scream caution when my soul says yes? And I understood, because fear became more convincing than me. Because I gave it so much power that I no longer knew if what I felt was true or a trap disguised as protection. There I remembered a teaching that changed how I experience fear. Fear isn't a guide, it's a signal. Not for you to follow, but for you to observe. You know what? Every time fear appears, there's a door. Not a wall, a door. But if you believe fear is right, you close that door without touching it. And you do this again and again until that inner voice, that real voice, starts to go silent. Not because it closed, but because you stopped paying attention to it. And when you no longer trust its voice, you start depending on everything else. Noise of approval, advice, methods, and you get lost. Because you can no longer tell if what you're doing comes from you or from your conditioning. How do you reclaim that voice? The first step is accepting that fear won't go away. This isn't about eliminating it, it's about stopping your obedience to it, because fear will always speak. But you can choose who to listen to. The one saying, "Protect yourself," or the one saying, "Move forward, even if you tremble." That choice changes everything. I started small. Every day I'd ask simple questions. 1. Am I doing this from love or from fear? 2. Does this decision expand me or imprison me? 3. Is this conversation from my truth or from my need to suppress? And sometimes the answer hurt, but ignoring it hurt more. I started writing what I felt, not what I was supposed to say. I sat in silence and listened without judgment. At first it was faint, but slowly the voice returned. Non-negotiable, deep, soft. Today it tells me when to speak, when to stay silent, when to insist, when to let go. Not with words, but with certainty. That certainty that doesn't shout, but opens the body, that gives peace even when there's risk. And I started living from there. Not always perfectly, but increasingly aligned, because alignment isn't doing everything right. It's doing what's yours, even if they don't understand, even if it's not popular, even if nobody validates it. You know what? The inner voice is like a muscle. If you don't use it, it atrophies. If you ignore it, it weakens. But if you listen to it, even in small things, it strengthens. And when it strengthens, you don't need the outside so much, because you're not searching for what to do, you're remembering what you already know. And that sets you free. But getting there takes courage. the courage to disappoint expectations, the courage to seem illogical, the courage to fail following your own truth instead of succeeding following someone else's, because this is another sabotage of fear, convincing you it's better to be wrong obeying it than to be wrong following yourself. And here's the trick. Failing from your truth is preferable to succeeding on a path that isn't yours, because authentic failure teaches you. Others' success empties you. Someone I admire once told me, "You are your direct connection to the unseen. And if you sabotage that, you disconnect from yourself, from life, from everything you could be." And that sentence shook me, because I understood this wasn't just about decisions, it was about identity, about not living someone else's life out of fear of honoring mine, about not building messages for others while abandoning my inner home. And since then, I decided, no more internal betrayals, no more comfortable silences, no more choices based on what people will say. I started living from what burns me, from what calls me, what I can't explain but know is mine. And that's when I finally started living, not to fit in, but to be alive. If you feel that voice has closed inside you, listen to me carefully. It didn't shut down. It's just waiting for you to stop ignoring it, stop silencing it with excuses, stop hiding it behind fear. Because it doesn't need validation. It just needs to be heard. And when you do that, you'll be amazed at everything you already knew, everything you always knew, everything your soul was screaming while your mind convinced you to stay where you don't belong. Your inner voice doesn't need power. It needs space, silence. It needs you to trust that what you don't understand now will make sense later, because that voice doesn't lead you to the easy, it leads you to the true. And the true, even when uncomfortable, always liberates. Don't keep giving your decisions to a fear that learned to speak in your tone. Return to yourself. Return to that sacred frequency, where nothing can be explained but everything is understood, where there are no external certainties, but there's an internal truth no one can take from you. Not fear, not failure, not the past. Only you can silence it, but only you can also make it bloom. Listen, you're closer to yourself than you think. You just need to remember how your soul sounds when fear goes quiet. Transforming fear as mental energy. I didn't know fear was energy. I didn't understand it that way. I saw it as an enemy to suppress and destroy, something that needed to disappear. But the more I fought it, the stronger it became. It attacked me from within. It disguised itself as insomnia, anxiety, burnout, anger. I thought something was wrong with me, that I shouldn't feel this, that it was spiritual failure. But it wasn't. It was stagnant energy, frozen life waiting to be moved. Fear is unexpressed movement, fire that can't find a channel, electricity without ground. That's why it burns. That's why it suffocates. That's why it screams. Not to harm you, but to remind you. And everything started then, when I understood fear wasn't a wall, but a force waiting to be directed. Someone told me, "What if fear is just a signal of power inside you that you're not using?" And that made me question everything, because it made sense. Why does fear always appear right when I'm about to move, advance, say what I've never said, change what I've always tolerated? Why doesn't it appear when I'm submissive, autopilot, faded? Because fear doesn't come to slow your light. It comes to test if you're ready to hold it. And if you don't understand that, you sabotage yourself. You think the shaking means you should stop. But trembling is the warning that your energy is alive, that you're accumulating what you want to transmit. And if you let it explode inside, it destroys. But if you channel it, it becomes power. I learned to transform fear when I stopped fearing it, when I stopped seeing it as an ending, and started seeing it as a beginning. When I felt tightness in my chest, pressure like a weight, instead of running, I stayed and breathed. I closed my eyes and said, "This is also energy, and I'm going to move it." Sometimes I talked to myself. Sometimes I walked hard. Sometimes I yelled in a safe place. Sometimes I wrote until my hands hurt. Sometimes I danced until my body sweated out the emotion. The point wasn't to suppress, rationalize, or bury, because every time you hide your fear, you also hide your power. Transformation isn't mystical, it's practical emotional alchemy. You take excitement and turn it into an engine. You take a shadow and use it as fuel. You take a suffocating thought and rewrite it with courage. And no, it doesn't always feel beautiful, but it feels alive. And living from there is different, because you no longer run, you no longer deny yourself, you no longer hide, you face, you speak, you listen, and from there you move. Not from fear, from the energy, fear released. I remember once I was under enormous pressure. Everything felt like it was falling apart. Work, relationships, faith, everything. I was full of thoughts, screaming, "You won't make it. This is too big for you. You should stop." But instead of obeying them, I asked myself, who's speaking here? The me built to progress, or the fear that wants to avoid change? And I decided not to react. Just observe, breathe, let that energy do its work without controlling it. That night I cried like I hadn't cried in years. I screamed, I emptied myself, and in that vulnerability I discovered a new power. Not the power of character, not the power of success, but the power of someone who dares to stay with themselves while everything burns. The next day, I made decisions without thinking. I called who I needed to call. I closed loops. I opened roads. Not because I wasn't afraid anymore, but because it no longer ruled me. Because I understood that the energy scaring me was the same, energy that could free me. And it did. From that moment, every time fear appears, I don't run anymore. I stop, appreciate, and use. Because behind every fear is a direction, a truth, a key, an expansion. You just have to dare to touch it. Now I want you to ask yourself something honestly. What are you doing with your fear? Are you burying it, denying it, turning it into an excuse? Or are you recognizing and transforming it? Because every fear has a message. It's telling you where there's blocked energy, where there's unspoken truth, where there's suppressed desire. It's not your enemy, it's your teacher, but only if you listen, only if you stop rejecting it, only if you decide to move with it, not against it. And this requires practice, emotional courage. It requires sitting with yourself without judgment, breathing in the middle of chaos, choosing a new response. But here's the beautiful part. Every time you do this, you reclaim a part of yourself, a part you surrendered to fear, a power you hid behind it, and you become more real, more free, more powerful. The key is understanding fear and desire are energy from the same place. Only fear blocks. Desire pushes. If you paralyze that energy, it rots. But if you channel it, it becomes drive, vision, creation. So when your soul trembles, don't run. Breathe. Recognize. Move forward. Speak. Scream if you need to. Cry if you need to. But don't suppress. Don't shut down. Because your fear also wants to serve you. It just needs a purpose. Start today. Choose a situation where fear is screaming, and don't run. Sit across from it like an old friend. Ask, what are you showing me? Which part of me wants to be born? Which energy are you blocking? And then move, not from reaction, but from transformation. Do one small thing today representing a new way, a call, a conversation, a change, whatever it is, but do it. And you'll see how fear turns into fuel, how what used to stop you now powers you. That's transformation, not denying darkness, illuminating it from within, not running from your shadow, turning it into form, not waiting for it to stop hurting, moving even when it burns. And believe me, this is the most powerful alchemy you can learn, because it frees you, because it elevates you, because it makes you the creator of your own mind. Fear is energy. Will you use it to build yourself or to keep running from yourself? The choice is yours. How to erase economic fear. This fear isn't felt in the heart. It's felt in the stomach, like a stone that won't let you breathe, like invisible pressure that never leaves. It's the fear of not having, of barely managing, of not making it, of seeing your account at zero and your faith below it. It doesn't matter if you have a job or not, if you earn well or poorly, if you're young or adult. Economic fear settles in like an uninvited guest and starts occupying every corner of your mind, your decisions, your dreams, your relationship with money, even your self-esteem, because it doesn't tell you that you don't have. It tells you that you're not enough, not smart enough, not worthy enough, not talented enough, not free enough. And you believe it because you feel it. I believed it too. For years, money was an emotional prison, not because I didn't have moments of abundance, but because I didn't trust myself to sustain it. I felt that any move could ruin everything, that I shouldn't enjoy it, that if I had it, I needed to guard it with fear, and if I lost it, I needed to blame myself mercilessly. I was thinking about debts before they even existed. I sabotaged decisions that could elevate me just because, what if it doesn't work? What if I go into debt? What if I fail? But one day, I got tired. Tired of living on defense. Tired of measuring my courage by what was in my chest. Tired of fearing something that wasn't even real. And I sat with myself again, alone. No excuses. And I wondered, what's the real economic fear? Losing money? Losing income? Living with less? Starting from zero? But none of that was the real fear. What hurt was what I thought that said about me. In my mind, financial failure was synonymous with shame, humiliation, unworthiness, disappointing those who believed in me, having to ask for help, facing my wounded ego. And what truly paralyzes us isn't money, it's the identity we attach to it. The idea that you're worth as much as you produce, that you are what you create, that if you can't pay, you don't deserve your idea. That's when I started breaking the invisible threads, because financial reality is one thing, financial mindset is another. You might not have money and feel abundant. You might have money and still feel poor, because real wealth doesn't start in your account. It starts in your belief system, in how you see the world, in your emotional relationship with money. And you can change that today, even if you don't have a penny. One of the sentences that helped me understand this most was, "Poverty is a state of mind that emerges when fear takes control of your economic decisions." And that was me. I wasn't poor. I was acting poor. I wasn't failing. I was acting like someone afraid to fail. I wasn't weak. I'd forgotten to trust myself when everything seemed to be falling apart. Then I decided to redefine everything. What earning meant, what failing was, what having was, what need was. And I realized the thing I needed most wasn't money. It was faith. Faith not in failure, not in luck, not in loss, but in my ability to adapt, learn, rise. Because nobody fails because they lose money. They fail when they surrender to the idea they can't recreate it. They fail when they stop trying out of fear of mistakes. They fail when they believe their destiny is out of their control. But when you understand that you are the source, that money is nothing more than an expression of focused energy, that what you give returns, that if you give consciously, you no longer fear, because you know that even if you fall, you can rise wiser, because you know you're not dependent on the global economy, a boss, or an algorithm. You're dependent on your faith in yourself, on your willingness not to give up. And that's when the shift began. I started making decisions from expansion, not contraction. I started saying yes to opportunities that scared me but felt right for me. I started moving money with commitment, not attachment. I started talking to money not like a judge, but like an ally. I started seeing myself not just as someone who deserves to grow, but as someone who has to do this to show others it's possible. And slowly, fear lost power, not because it disappeared, but because it was no longer in my way. I used it as a signal, not a limit. And if you're wondering how it's done, here's how it starts. Start by questioning the story you've adopted about money. You were told it's scarce, dirty, that only bad people have it, that you have to suffer to earn it. Then all of that forms your subconscious programming. And unless you change it, fear will keep controlling you. Then check how you talk about money when you talk about yourself. Do you say, "I'll never make it. I'm a disaster. This isn't for me"? No. Every word shapes your reality. Don't just believe what you do, believe what you say. And if what you're claiming is loaded with lack, that's what you'll see, even if you have it. Then do something small but symbolic. Invest in yourself, even a little, a course, a book, an experience that elevates you. Do it not from guilt, but from love. Definitely not from fear. And repeat to yourself, money flows to me in direct proportion to my faith, my approach, and my willingness to serve from my truth. And I repeated that sentence to myself until I believed it. And when I believed it, everything started changing. Not overnight, but with a consistency I'd never known before. Today, I'm not talking to you like someone who's solved everything. I'm talking to you as someone who learned that economic fear is just an illusion, lies we accept as truth, and that it's possible to live without that fear, that you can be free, that you can trust what you give returns, that what you believe from your soul grows. So look in the mirror without excuses and ask yourself, how many decisions am I avoiding out of fear of losing? How many dreams am I postponing out of fear of failure? How much power did I give away out of fear of not having? And now decide. Will you keep being defined by fear? Or will you use it as an impulse to transform your relationship with money forever? But you're not broken. You're remembering your power. And that's already the beginning of real wealth. The new mindset of unshakable belief. There comes a time when you can no longer keep walking in fear, not because it disappeared, but because living paralyzed starts hurting more than moving forward without guarantees. And I reached that point. I was drowning, playing scenarios in my mind, everything that could go wrong, everything I couldn't reach, everything I couldn't control. It was like my mind had turned into a courtroom, and every step was being evaluated with invisible punishments. Until a voice, I don't know if it came from inside or outside, said something that broke me and opened me at the same time. What you're missing isn't security. What you're missing is faith. Faith. I'd used that word so many times. Not as religion, not as wishful thinking, but as mental power. Solid belief, certainty that doesn't ask for proof, the invisible thing that allows you to walk where others stop. There I understood everything. Fear feeds on doubt, but faith is the only substance that weakens it from the root. Because faith doesn't argue with fear. It doesn't give it power. It simply ignores it and continues, not with arrogance, but with a higher truth. Faith doesn't deny what is, but it doesn't make it the limit either. Faith doesn't need everything to be resolved, because it knows everything is resolving. Faith isn't an emotion. It's a decision renewed every day. even when everything outside looks the same. How I built that faith. You know how I built that faith? It didn't happen all at once. It happened in pieces, in the nights when nobody saw me, and I told myself, you didn't come to give up. It happened in the days when everything felt like waste, and I still decided to move 1 centimeter forward. It happened in the silences when I chose to listen to possibility's voice, not the child's voice. Because here's something else. Faith isn't always felt. It's not euphoria. It's not motivation. It's an internal structure, a root, invisible ground, a low but solid voice telling you to keep going, even when it hurts, even when you can't see, even when you don't understand. And for that, the mind must be retrained, because if your mind was trained to expect the worst, your body obeys. Your decisions reflect it. Your words sow it. Your life confirms it. But if you start teaching your mind to think from faith, everything starts to change. How do you do that? First, by watching your words. Because every time you say, I can't, it's too hard, it definitely won't work. You're affirming a reality that doesn't exist yet. But without realizing it, what are you building? So I started painting myself differently. I'd hear what I thought and interrupt my own words. This isn't faith. This is fear disguised as logic. Then I'd wonder, what would someone who believes in themselves say at this point? And even if I didn't feel it yet, I'd say it. Because language is creative. It doesn't mean speak according to what you feel. Speak according to what you want to feel. Then I observed who I was listening to. Because faith is nurtured inside but spreads in community. If you're surrounded by people who only repeat tragedies, who only see the negative, who only sow distrust, your mental cell fills with cracks. So I distanced myself, not to judge, but for spiritual hygiene, and I looked for voices that reminded me who I could be. Mentors, authors, even conversations with my future self. Because I talk to that self, the one who's already overcome what I'm facing now. I ask, how did you understand? And I listen, and I write, and I let myself be guided from there. And most importantly, action. Because faith without action rots. Faith becomes fantasy. Faith is built in movement, even if it's minimal, even if it's clumsy. Because every step you take with faith strengthens you, convinces you, transforms you. You don't need everything to align. You just need one true reason to follow. Just one. I chose mine. I won't let the fear of what might happen destroy what I want to exist. And that was my flag. And every time I doubted, I reminded myself of that. And I moved forward, sometimes crying, but moving forward. Faith is the soul's spiritual muscle, and like all muscles, it's trained with resistance. Life doesn't thrive in comfort. It's forged on the days when nothing makes sense and you still choose to believe. On the days when everything fails and you still choose to trust. On the days when the world screams at you to give up and you answer, I'm not done yet. That's faith. Not a mirror, a practice, a stance. The decision not to surrender your mind to the visible, but to surrender it to what you can create. And when you live from there, everything changes. Not because there are no challenges, but because you no longer kneel before them. Because you no longer let them become part of your mind, of your fear. Because you no longer let doubt have the final word. Because you now know you have an invisible but invincible foundation, and every time fear tries to enter, you raise your faith like a soft sword and simply say, not here. This mind is no longer yours. It belongs to my vision, to my purpose, to my truth. Today I want you to say this too. I want you to record it in your mind from every angle. Your mind doesn't belong to fear. It belongs to your vision, your purpose, your truth. And if you decide to live from there, every day is an act of faith, an act of creation, an act of freedom. Because when faith is your reflection, the world can roar, but you no longer tremble. Because you now walk with a force that's invisible, but transforms everything. And that, dear reader, can no longer be stopped. It's nurtured, it's honored, and it's expanded until you become proof that faith can do anything. And now that you've come this far, there's no going back, because the person who's recognized their fear can no longer be its slave. The Final Reckoning. This book didn't come to entertain you. It came to wake you up, a real shock. And if something stirred inside you, use it. Don't go back to sleep. Don't settle again. You have the power to rewrite every belief that's been shrinking you. Fear has nowhere left to hide. This work was created for education and personal transformation. It's not official material. It's a deep, adapted interpretation of the most powerful ideas about fear and mind, so you can understand and apply them in your life in a real, direct way. Listen, this work was produced solely to awaken you, and if this resonated with you, I invite you to explore more. There's more content designed to take you further, deeper into awakening. Remember, you didn't come here to survive. You came to overcome yourself, and now you know how. Breaking the Chains, the Final Declaration. Let me speak to you one last time as if we're sitting across from each other, eye to eye, soul to soul. You've come this far not by accident. You came because somewhere deep inside, you already knew the truth I've been sharing with you. Fear is not your master. It never was. It was just the loudest voice in a room full of whispers, the voice you were taught to obey before you even knew you had a choice. But now you know differently. Now you know that every time you hesitated, every time you held back, every time you chose the smaller version of yourself, it wasn't because you were weak. It was because you were following an inherited script, a program you didn't write, a contract you never signed with your full awareness. But contracts can be broken, programs can be rewritten, scripts can be burned. What happens next is up to you. You can close this and return to the life you had. You can nod, agree, feel inspired for a moment, and then let fear whisper you back into comfort. Or you can do something different. You can take what you've learned here and weaponize it. Not against the world, but against every internal lie that's been stopping you. You can start today, not tomorrow, not when you feel ready, not when the conditions are perfect. Today, with one decision, one action, one refusal to obey the voice that's kept you small. Because here's what I've learned after years of fighting this battle. The life you want doesn't require you to stop being afraid. It requires you to stop letting fear decide. There's a version of you that's been waiting in the shadows, a version that doesn't flinch when opportunity knocks, a version that doesn't apologize for taking up space, a version that moves with purpose, speaks with clarity, and refuses to shrink. That version isn't somewhere in the distant future. It's available right now. The only thing standing between you and that version is a choice, not a feeling, not a moment of courage, not perfect conditions. A choice. The choice to stop negotiating with fear. The choice to stop waiting for permission. The choice to trust that even if you stumble, even if you fail, even if people walk away, you'll still be whole. Because your worth was never tied to their approval. Your power was never dependent on their validation. Your truth was never up for debate. It was always yours. Buried under layers of conditioning, yes. Hidden beneath years of doubt, yes. But always yours. And the moment you decide to reclaim it, everything shifts. Not externally, not immediately, but internally, permanently. You stop living in reaction and start living in creation. You stop asking, "What if I fail?" and start asking, "What if I don't try?" You stop searching for the right moment and start creating it. Here's what I know about you. I know you're tired, tired of living small, tired of silencing the voice inside that knows you're capable of more, tired of watching others live the life you've been dreaming about. I know you've been hurt, that trust has been broken, that you've tried before and it didn't work out the way you hoped. I know fear feels rational, that the reasons for staying where you are seem logical, justified, even wise. But I also know this. Wisdom isn't always found in caution. Sometimes it's found in the willingness to leap, not recklessly, not blindly, but with eyes wide open, knowing the risk, understanding the cost, and deciding it's worth it anyway. Because the cost of staying the same is always higher than the cost of changing. The pain of regret always cuts deeper than the pain of trying. And the weight of what if is heavier than any failure could ever be. So, here's my final question for you. What would you do if you knew, truly knew, that fear was lying to you? What would you pursue if you trusted that your past doesn't define your future? What would you create if you believed that failure was just feedback, not a verdict? What would you become if you stopped waiting for the fear to go away and just moved anyway? Because that's the secret they don't tell you. Fearless people don't exist. Brave people do. And the only difference between them and everyone else is that they decided fear gets a voice, but not a vote. They feel it. They acknowledge it. They even respect it. But they don't obey it. And starting today, neither do you. This is your declaration. Say it out loud. Say it to yourself in the mirror. Say it to the fear that's been running your life. I see you, I hear you, but I'm done obeying you. You don't get to choose my career. You don't get to choose my relationships. You don't get to choose my dreams. You're a passenger now, not the driver. I'm taking back the wheel. I'm reclaiming my voice. I'm stepping into the version of myself I was always meant to be. And if you want to come along for the ride, fine, but you don't get to tell me where we're going. Not anymore. The journey from here. What happens next won't always be easy. There will be days when fear screams louder than ever, days when doubt creeps back in, days when the old patterns try to reclaim their territory. But you'll be different now, because you'll know what's happening. You'll recognize the voice. You'll see the trap before you step into it, and instead of collapsing, you'll pause. Breathe. Remind yourself of who you're becoming. You'll ask, is this my truth or is this my conditioning? And you'll choose accordingly. Small steps, massive shifts. You don't have to overhaul your entire life tomorrow. You don't have to quit your job, move to a new city, or burn every bridge. You just have to start somewhere. Make the call you've been avoiding. Send the message you've been drafting in your head for months. Sign up for the thing that excites and terrifies you. Say no to what drains you. Say yes to what expands you. Stop hiding your gifts because you're afraid of judgment. Stop playing small because you're afraid of outgrowing people. Stop waiting for perfect and start moving with present. Because perfection is a myth fear uses to keep you frozen. But progress? Progress is real. Progress is available. Progress is yours. You are not starting from scratch. Even if it feels like you are. Even if it feels like you've wasted years. Even if you look at where you are and wonder how you got here. You're not starting from scratch. You're starting from experience. Every mistake taught you something. Every failure revealed a strength. Every moment you survived when you thought you couldn't, that built you. And now you get to take all of that, the pain, the lessons, the scars, and turn it into fuel. Not because you're bitter, not because you need to prove anything to anyone, but because you finally understand Your story isn't over. It's just beginning. And the chapters ahead? They're going to be written by the version of you who refused to let fear have the final word, to the person you're becoming. I see you, the one reading this and feeling something shift inside, the one who's been waiting for permission to be more, do more, risk more. You don't need permission. You never did. What you needed was a reminder, a mirror, a voice saying what you already knew but were afraid to admit. You are capable, you are worthy, you are ready. Not perfectly ready, not fearlessly ready, but ready enough. And that's all it takes. This is not the end. This is the beginning of you living as the person you were meant to be, before fear taught you to dim your light. This is you realizing that the shaking hands, the racing heart, the nervous energy, those aren't signs to stop. They're signs you're alive. They're signs you're growing. They're signs you're stepping into something that matters. And that's exactly where you belong. So go and do the thing you've been avoiding. Go and speak the truth you've been swallowing. Go and become the person you've been pretending you can't be. Not because it will be easy, not because you'll do it perfectly, not because everyone will understand, but because your soul demands it, because you've waited long enough, because the only thing more terrifying than trying and failing is never trying at all. Fear will always be there, but so will you. And between the two of you, you're stronger. You always were. You just forgot for a while. But now you remember, and everything is about to change. Not because fear disappeared, but because you stopped obeying it. And that is how you become unstoppable. Welcome to your new life, the one where fear still whispers, but you don't listen. The one where doubt still visits, but you don't let it stay. The one where you walk forward, trembling, uncertain, imperfect, but you walk anyway, because that's what brave people do, not because they're unafraid, but because they've decided that who they're becoming matters more than what they're afraid of. And now, so have you. This is your time, not someday, not when you're ready, not when conditions align. Now, while your heart is still racing from these words, while the fire is still lit, while the truth is still ringing in your ears, move. And don't stop until you've become the person fear tried to convince you that you could never be. Because that person, they were always real. They were just waiting for you to believe it. And now you do. Go, create, transform, lead. Your inner world is waiting. And so is the life you were born to live. No more fear, no more excuses, no more waiting. Just you, your truth, your power, unstoppable.